Hi, my name is Harshni, and I will be presenting our work titled Security, Privacy, and Data Sharing Trade Offs When Moving to the United States Insights from a Qualitative Study. This work was done in collaboration with co first authors Mindy and Collins and supporting authors Rachel, Louisa, Cora, Lucy, and Yasmin. Millions move to the US, facing complex security, privacy, and data sharing challenges. According to the US Department of State, 2 million immigrant, that is, non tourist visas were issued between 2019 and 2023. The visa process is complex, and applicants are required to share a lot of sensitive information with various parties, both official and non officials. People moving to the US facing visa scams is not unheard of. The US government also frequently issues scam warnings. Despite this, numerous cases of scams are common news. Moreover, adding to this complexity, the moving process involves multiple steps and interactions with various known and unknown entities that threaten people's ontological security, that is, the feeling of safety and security in one's own environment. To understand various security and privacy problems of people who move to the US, we looked at the following research questions: threats, risks, and concerns during the visa process, scams and other adverse experiences during moving, bureaucratic and administrative challenges with impacts on security and privacy, technical security, privacy, and access challenges when moving to the US, sources of security and privacy advice throughout the moving process. To answer our research questions, we conducted 25 semi structured interviews with participants recruited through social media, personal networks, and Prolific, and we analyzed our data using thematic analysis. Our results highlight the following themes. Looking at each of these themes in detail, we start with sharing sensitive information and documents. All participants were required to share multiple documents with various entities both prior to and after the visa application process. A lot of participants' threats and concerns centered around feeling uncomfortable sharing sensitive documents of themselves, but also documents containing personal information of others, as well as how this information could be misused in case of leakage. While most participants understood why their financial information is required, some participants were concerned, particularly with sharing documents of their family. As P15 stated, if they had a question about me, I would definitely answer, but giving my parents personal information, I felt what they were doing was a little awkward. Additionally, P07 also expressed being uncomfortable about sharing wedding photos. As she mentioned, I just had to show a few wedding photos as well. It was a small pocket album that I carried with myself. That was one silly thing which I felt is not required. I felt funny. Why should I show my photos? Is it really required? Overall, participants expressed violation of personal privacy and sometimes violation of cultural norms. And they also expressed a mistrust due to a lack of transparency in data sharing practices. When asked about how they decide with whom to share documents and information with, most participants felt like they had no choice but to share the documents and information they were asked for in order to receive their visa. As P10 mentioned, this is a standard procedure. If I have to live here, I have to do it. That's it. Like getting vaccinated, this is the procedure. If I don't want to share, I can go. Additionally, P15 mentioned, I felt they were poking into some of my personal things. It's poking into my personal space. If I had an option, I wouldn't want to share it with them. While some participants were comfortable to share sensitive information with official entities, A few simply were not and felt like they were compelled to share the information in order to avail a visa. We also found that several working professionals and dependents indicated that they did not know which of their personal documents had been shared with the embassy because their employer or spouse had filled the visa application on their behalf. Often, they had shared this information with the employer at some point but did not remember later. As P21 mentioned, I think the hospital might have handled that because I don't remember submitting those. Therefore, some participants mentioned that they had no overview over who has access to their documents and personal information. The second theme talks about exacerbated online threats. When moving to a new country, individuals are often required to follow many new processes that they may not be familiar with. This may make it harder for them to distinguish between legitimate information and fraud. Participants indicated facing heightened vulnerability to scams. For instance, students were required to rent a place in the US as well as sign a lease in advance of their travel. A vast majority of them were not able to view the apartment and environment in which they will be living in person before moving and had to make a binding decision online. This made them particularly susceptible to rental scams. P01 shared their experience, stating, I had to rent a house before I came to the US. I couldn't see the house. I couldn't see the rest of the environment before I rented it. You just had to believe the other. If you are lucky, it's real. And if you're unlucky, you will lose your money. And sometimes postings of housing and rentals are not always vetted by the universities or employers. Most participants also mentioned receiving scam calls, emails, and false online postings as threats. One participant mentioned receiving a call from a fake immigration and customs enforcement agent. And they expressed, I did actually receive a scam call from someone pretending to be an ICE agent. He said that I had some documents that I did not submit through. And because of that, my application is going to be suspended or canceled. Additionally, P15 also stated that they received a fake call from someone pretending to be a DMV agent and gave their license information away and later realized that it was a scam call. Scammers therefore prey on vulnerabilities of vulnerable people, for instance, threatening to deport someone if they do not hand in information. The third theme being bureaucratic and administrative barriers to security and privacy. Here we find bureaucratic and administrative issues contributed to violations of security and privacy and feelings of unease, fear, or discomfort through the moving process. For instance, participants indicated that they struggled to get assistance from their respective embassies during the visa process and a lack of transparency in regard to the visa processing status. Most participants indicated that they struggled to get assistance from their embassy, and they also indicated that there was unclear instructions and information on embassies' websites, insufficient support, and a lack of transparency in regard to the visa processing status. As P03 and P16 mentioned, contacting or looking for information on the website about a specific visa status or a visa process and did not get any sort of guidance from the embassy itself. Therefore, unclear directions sometimes led to incorrectly completed forms, subsequently attracting unwanted fees. Additionally, visa interviews at most US embassies are administered in an open space that is shared with other waiting applicants. This unfortunately means that applicants can overhear other applicants' interviews. As P02, who was uncomfortable during the visa interview process, mentioned, it is weird to be interviewed about this kind of stuff with other people around. There were maybe 20, 30 people in the room while you were being interviewed, so people can hear you. Therefore, visa interviews are not private, and there's a risk of other applicants overhearing sensitive information. And a common way of sharing documents and receiving passports from the embassy after visa approval is through postal services, which contributed to a fear of losing these documents. As P14 and P03 stated that they had a little to no trust in postal services. As P03 stated that their friend's passport was almost lost by the postal service. Therefore, participants misplaced or lost passports and other visa documents, impacting personal security and identity. In addition to procedural challenges that make participants vulnerable throughout the visa process, we also found that participants encountered technical challenges during and after their move to the US. Most of these issues were specifically related to geographically imposed restrictions on access to systems, software, or telecommunications network. As P18 mentioned, I want to keep my German settings, and this is why I cannot enter US services. They are simply not in the store. I have to use another phone. Certain apps in America are not available in the store in Germany, and that's a problem. People moving to the US could be vulnerable to installing malware impersonating genuine apps. Geofiltering can sometimes lock legitimate users out. Additionally, some participants encountered challenges with multi-factor authentication, where security codes or one-time passwords were sent to their old phone numbers, despite the fact that these numbers were no longer in service or use. Well-intended security measures like multi-factor authentication can inhibit access to legitimate users. And the final theme shows a lack of security and privacy advice to people who are moving to the United States. Our findings thus far show that the process of moving to the US, from applying for a visa to arriving and getting settled, can be a process that causes discomfort, confusion, and unease, particularly around sharing information, and potentially leading to security and privacy violations. Given this lack of clarity, participants often sought and were given advice about navigating the moving process. While most participants perceived the advice they received from their employers, officials, and schools were helpful, they also felt that the advice was generic and not really life-altering, and instead sought advice from communities and people who previously moved to the US. Lack of advice around data sharing practices was also prevalent during the interviews. Though our population constituted of people who moved to the US, their threat models can also be extended across various other populations. The key takeaway here is administrative processes and bureaucratic policies amplify security and privacy concerns rather than mollifying or preventing them. Therefore, we recommend respecting local cultural norms around data sharing and privacy, increasing transparency about data sharing, educating users on secure data sharing practices, having closed spaces during visa interviews for enhanced privacy, and offering applicants a secure way of sharing and receiving them. Secondly, new environments increases vulnerabilities to scams and introduces technological barriers to security and privacy. Therefore, we recommend more support from employers and schools, vetting legitimacy of housing ads, information about common scams. Better identification techniques on online platforms also helps people moving to the US. Enabling switching app store location and platforms enabling location switching. Alternate authentication methods to SMS based 2FA can also be helpful. Finally, to summarize, we studied unique security, privacy, and data sharing challenges of people moving to the United States. We conducted 25 semi structured interviews with people who moved to the US in 2017 or later. We found data sharing concerns, exacerbated online threats, and technological barriers as major challenges. Thanks for listening.